Okay, let's talk climate change. I am quite disappointed by the fact that this has become somewhat of a divisive issue. And also, I am quite disappointed by the fact that this is something that we have all kind of casually tossed aside as more relevant issues have come into the fray. But that makes sense, given the type of issue that climate change is. To put you in the perspective of how I think climate change is affecting society, it's at such a low level that it isn't something that many people are consciously aware of how it's affecting so many aspects of what they're doing. The metaphor I like to use is imagine you wake up not with like a raging migraine, but just a slight little headache. You didn't get enough sleep last night. And then you know, you're trying to have a conversation about business, and you're kind of tired, but there's just this fly fucking in the room, and so you're constantly getting distracted by this fly, and then you try to swat the fly away, and you actually bang your finger on this random shit, and you're still trying to talk about this business meeting, and you still got this headache, and then suddenly, as you are like fuck this, as to say, fuck, I hit my hand, you suddenly accidentally are saying that in the middle of someone else while they're talking. And so, the business meeting starts to careen slowly out of control as you just can't fucking get a grip. This is kind of what climate change does to a civilization. It's not so big at first, it's a few more hurricanes a year here, and maybe a drought there, and maybe some more refugees against the border, and then it's just all these little things that slowly compound and take away your civilization's ability to focus and to actually effectively act on anything, because there's a million little crises that are stress testing every single system that you have as a civilization. To give one example of how climate change is doing this, Florida's insurance company is almost fucking bankrupting the state of Florida because the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, has continued to provide insurance, has actually, the Republican Party there has made it such that the state will subsidize home insurance because all private insurers have pulled out due to climate change risk. And this is happening in several different places. California has something going on quite similar to this. This is not just a Republican problem. This is an everybody problem. California has decided to subsidize homes that are at risk of fire, and it's slowly bankrupting the state. It's constant little things like this where small natural disasters stress test insurance. If insurance is feeling stress tested, that means there's going to be less investment in certain communities and neighborhoods, both on the places that are actually, catching fire. But people forget about this. Insurance funds are some of the biggest private investors in venture capital, in startups, and in new businesses via being LPs and all of these things. And so you're not just losing the productivity of, now these states are subsidizing people who shouldn't be living in certain places. You're also losing the dynamism in your economy, and you don't even realize that both of these are fundamentally connected to climate change. It's so subtle. The reality is we've also built our food system in such a way that it relies on such stable temperatures, and when we have things like climate change, guess what? Lots of farm subsidies get suddenly a lot more fucking expensive because there's a huge amount of fluctuation suddenly in crop yields. And this leads to, again, just a little bit of focus being sapped away, a little bit of intentionality, a little bit of understanding of what the fuck is going on, just subtly leaving the door. And it's just, it's crazy because it's not something that most have an awareness of how many subtle things climate change is affecting. It's scary, but it's also fundamentally just the type of species that we are. And so, what institutions are being affected by this? Well, obviously, like I just said, state insurance funds are getting fucking railroaded, bro. It's so bad. Oh, it is unbelievable how many different states are dealing with this in the exact same very dumb manner, which is by subsidizing housing insurance for people who honestly are living in places that no longer make sense to live in. This is also particularly bad for the US. A lot of our infrastructure was built 100 years ago and was supposed to be replaced right about now. To be honest, actually, it was built closer to 110 years ago and supposed to be replaced 10 years ago. But I'm not sure if you remember much about 10 years ago, roughly 2015, 2013-ish. The Great Recession had just ended. And so it wasn't like we suddenly had all this money to be investing in infrastructure. And we continue not to be able to invest in infrastructure because right as, we would have been at the right time to invest in that infrastructure, we got hit by a fucking pandemic, Biden tried, but Biden couldn't get through to like the average American about the seriousness of the lack of critical infrastructure upgrades. And so a lot of this is really, really, really scarily actually dams. Dams across the country were built in the middle of the 20th century to provide electricity to rural America. And I'm from Michigan, and there's so many instances already happening in Michigan alone of dams collapsing and flooding small towns, just wiping them off the map because the infrastructure wasn't built to last this long, on top of the fact that we are actually getting much more precipitation than we used to due, again, to climate change. And when you start to see things like this, where it's state insurance funds, state utilities, like fundamental civilization base load infrastructure not being equipped to handle what's coming, it becomes quite scary. And so where are many people like myself who have actually stayed paying attention to climate change and to all of the different things that are occurring, where are we putting our attention? You obviously don't hear us in the media much anymore. A lot of us, and I say this like being very, very serious. I have multiple tens of friends who have, in like my small San Francisco friend group alone, who have just quietly started to buy up lots of property in upper Midwest climate safe regions that are doing quite well with their infrastructure upgrades. And so if you're kind of a financy guy, one way that you can detect this subtle change in a lot of the disposition of the people around climate change has moved from, okay, we're obviously not going to be able to convince everyone to get on board with making the world not go through this really painful experience. China's got our backs on making sure that we don't hit 4 degrees. So maybe we'll hit somewhere in the 2 to 3 degree range, right? That's what a lot of people in my circles are pricing in, per se, in terms of how much climate change they expect to see by the end of century, somewhere in the 2 to 3 degree range. Maybe 3.5, and that's a really bad case scenario. So they're like, okay, we have pretty accurate models. We have pretty good understanding and data. Where will be best to live if we experience 2 to 3 degrees of climate change? Let me just go buy property there, as the real estate market currently is not pricing this in. The real estate market is mostly retail investors. When I say that, I mean non-institutional. And retail investors are not able to think about these big long-term macro trends. And so let me just subtly scoop up a few acres here, a few acres there, maybe a house or two here, rent them out, sit on them, just wait. And that's what a lot of people are doing. And unfortunately, I think this will cause a huge pain close to like 2035, 2040, wherein lots of people will start to really, really like economically need to stop moving to the Southwest and start moving to the Midwest, and it will be quite expensive. These places are not full of housing. It takes quite a lot of money to suddenly throw up a whole bunch of houses. We're not China. We're not about to build a whole bunch of ghost towns for people to move into in 15 years. So I think it's going to be kind of a quite intense capital crunch. If I had to have a prediction, I'd say people will be talking about the Twin Cities real estate market in the same way that people talk about like the wider Bay Area real estate market. Not San Francisco in particular. It won't be like Twin Cities is $1 million, but it'll be like suddenly everyone's wondering why Minneapolis can't build enough housing. So that's climate change. The slow building of annoying little tiny issues that cause you to not be able to actually execute on the things that matter. Like, for instance, recognizing that this is happening, maybe taking a step back and reorienting your plans around the fact that this is happening.